After my heart surgery, I wrote in our family chat, "Who will pick me up from the hospital?" My son replied, "Call a taxi. I'm watching TV." My wife added, "Stay in the hospital for another month. It's so nice without you." But when they saw me on the news that evening, their 67 calls went unanswered. What I did changed everything. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The pain hit like lightning, splitting my chest in half. I gasped, eyes flying open to harsh white light that made my skull pound. Where was I? The room spun in sickening circles. White walls, beeping machines, tubes snaking from my arms like plastic vines. I tried to sit up. My body screamed in protest. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. My chest felt like someone had cracked it open with a crowbar. Through the thin hospital gown, I could feel thick bandages wrapped around my torso. "Mr. Thompson, you're awake." A woman in a white coat appeared beside my bed. She had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I'm Dr. Carter, your cardiologist. How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck." My voice came out as a hoarse whisper. My throat burned raw. "What happened to me?" She checked something on the monitor beside my bed. The numbers meant nothing to me, but her expression remained calm and professional. "You underwent emergency cardiac surgery 2 days ago. Triple bypass. Your heart stopped for 47 seconds during the procedure." 47 seconds. The words echoed in my head like stones dropped in a deep well. Was I dead? Technically, yes. But we brought you back. She pressed her fingers against my wrist, counting my pulse. "You're going to be fine, Mr. Thompson." The surgery was successful. 2 weeks in the hospital for recovery, then gradual return to normal activities. 2 weeks. I looked around the sterile room again. A small window showed gray Dallas skyline under cloudy January skies. No flowers on the bedside table. No cards. No sign that anyone knew I was here. A nurse bustled in, checking the IV drip connected to my left arm. She had a warm smile and gentle hands as she adjusted the flow rate. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Jennifer. I'll be taking care of you on this shift. Are you experiencing any pain right now?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. She made a note on her chart and increased something in my IV. Within minutes, the sharp edges of pain began to soften. Dr. Carter pulled up a chair beside my bed. "Mr. Thompson, I need to ask you some questions to check your cognitive function. Can you tell me what year it is?" 2025. "Good. And what month?" "January." The word felt heavy on my tongue. "Excellent. Now squeeze my hands as hard as you can." She extended both hands toward me. My grip felt weak as a newborn's, but she nodded approvingly. "Your motor functions look good. Memory seems intact." She stood and made notes on her tablet. "The next few days will be about managing pain and beginning gentle movement. We'll have you walking short distances soon." After she left, I was alone with the machines and their endless beeping. I reached carefully toward the bedside table where someone had placed my belongings. My fingers found my phone. The screen showed dozens of notifications from news apps, email spam, pharmacy reminders. I scrolled down, looking for something else. Messages from family. Missed calls from Susan or Scott. Nothing. I checked the family group chat. The last message was from 3 weeks ago. Susan complaining about the grocery store being out of her favorite yogurt. Before that, Scott asking if I could lend him money for car repairs. Not a single message about my surgery. Not one call asking how I was doing. I set the phone down with trembling fingers and stared at the acoustic ceiling tiles above my bed. 47 seconds of being dead, and apparently no one had noticed I was gone. Not a single message. Not one call. I closed my eyes and let the silence of the hospital room wash over me. The antiseptic smell triggered something deeper, memories I'd been avoiding for months. It started in the summer of 2020. I was working in the garden behind our Arlington house, planting tomatoes in the heat. The chest tightness came like a band squeezing around my ribs. I gripped the fence post until it passed, telling myself it was just the Texas heat getting to me. "Buford, you're being dramatic again," Susan had called from the back porch, iced tea glass in her hand. "Come inside before you have a stroke out there." I'd laughed it off. 66 years old and still strong as an ox, I told myself. Just needed more water, more rest. But the episodes kept coming. By 2021, climbing the stairs to our bedroom became a mountain expedition. I'd pause on the landing, gripping the banister, while my heart hammered against my ribs like it was trying to escape. Susan would already be in bed, watching her evening shows. "You're getting old?" she'd say without looking away from the television. "Maybe cut back on those weekend projects." I never told her about the metallic taste that filled my mouth during the worst episodes, or how the world would tilt sideways when I stood too quickly. She had enough to worry about with her book club and charity meetings. Scott was even less helpful. When I mentioned feeling tired all the time, he'd shrug from his position on our living room couch. "Maybe see a doctor, Dad. Actually, wait, that's expensive. Try some vitamins first." 28 years old and living in our basement, but he worried about my medical bills affecting his inheritance. The first real attack happened in our kitchen on a Tuesday morning in March 2023. I was making coffee when the pain hit like a sledgehammer to my chest. I grabbed the counter, coffee grounds scattering across the floor as I slid down to the cold linoleum. "Susan!" I called out, but my voice barely carried beyond the kitchen doorway. She found me 10 minutes later, still on the floor, breathing in short gasps. "Oh, Buford, did you fall?" She helped me to a chair, but her attention was already shifting. "I've got my hair appointment in an hour. Are you okay to drive yourself to the doctor?" I drove myself to the emergency room instead. The young doctor who examined me had concerned eyes and steady hands. "Mr. Thompson, you've had a minor heart attack. We need to run more tests." The tests showed what I'd feared but couldn't admit. Years of chest pain hadn't been aging or stress. My arteries were closing like old pipes, clogged with rust. "Without surgery, you have 6 months. Maybe less," Dr. Martinez had told me in November. "But with triple bypass, you could have 10 good years ahead of you." I'd driven home in my old Chevy truck, hands shaking on the steering wheel. 10 good years. The question was whether I wanted to spend them with people who barely noticed when I was dying. The sound of my hospital room door opening brought me back to the present. Nurse Jennifer peeked in, checking on me with that warm smile. "How are you feeling, Mr. Thompson? Need anything for pain?" I looked at my phone again, still showing no messages from my family. "Just thinking about things." She nodded knowingly. "Surgery gives people time to think. Sometimes that's good, sometimes not so much." After she left, I stared at the family group chat contact on my phone. My finger hovered over it, hesitating. 2 weeks since surgery. 2 weeks of silence. But maybe they didn't know. Maybe the hospital hadn't contacted them properly. Maybe there was still hope that 45 years of marriage and raising a son meant something. Maybe. The morning of January the 29th arrived crisp and bright through my hospital window. Freedom Day. I packed my few belongings into the old sports bag Susan had brought me years ago for weekend fishing trips. Each item folded carefully. My reading glasses, the paperback novel I'd barely touched, the pajamas that still smelled like home. My chest felt stronger today. The stitches pulled when I moved, but the crushing pain had faded to a manageable ache. Dr. Carter had signed my discharge papers with a smile and instructions to take it easy for the next month. "You're lucky to be alive, Mr. Thompson," she'd said during her final check. "Make the most of this second chance." I checked my phone for the 20th time that morning. Still nothing from Susan or Scott. 2 weeks of complete silence while I fought my way back from the edge of death. Maybe they thought I was still too sick for visitors. Maybe they were planning some kind of welcome home surprise. I'd always been the one who handled medical emergencies in our family, driving Susan to her appendectomy, taking Scott to the emergency room when he broke his arm falling off his bike. They probably just didn't know how to act when I was the patient. I typed out a message in our family group chat. "Hi everyone, I'm being discharged today and feeling much better. Can't wait to see you all," and I deleted it. Too long, too emotional. They'd think I was being needy. I tried again. "Hospital is releasing me today. Looking forward to coming home," and delete. Still too much. Third attempt. "The doctor says I can come home today. Would love to see everyone." My finger hovered over send. This felt right, hopeful but not desperate. I pressed send and set the phone on the bed beside my packed bag. The response came faster than I expected. Scott's name appeared first. "Call a taxi. I'm watching TV." I stared at the message, reading it 3 times to make sure I understood correctly. 47 seconds of being clinically dead, 2 weeks in intensive care, and my son couldn't be bothered to pause his television show. But Susan would be different. Susan would understand. We'd been married 45 years. She'd want to bring me home personally. Her message appeared below Scott's. Stay another month in hospital. It's so good without you. The phone slipped from my hands onto the white hospital blanket. The words glowed on the screen like a neon sign announcing the end of everything I'd believed about my family. Stay another month. It's so good without you. I sat heavily on the edge of the bed, my sports bag sliding to the floor with a soft thud. The morning sunshine streaming through the window felt like mockery now. My chest ached, but not from the surgery. This pain came from somewhere deeper, somewhere that Dr. Carter's scalpel couldn't reach. Nurse Jennifer appeared in my doorway, clipboard in hand. She took one look at my face and stepped inside, closing the door behind her. Mr. Thompson, you look pale. Are you having chest pain? I shook my head, not trusting my voice. She picked up my phone from the bed and glanced at the screen. Her expression shifted from professional concern to something softer, sadder. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Family can be complicated. Complicated. That was one way to put it. Another way was that I'd spent 45 years of my life giving everything to people who saw me as nothing more than a paycheck and a caretaker. People who found my absence more pleasant than my presence. I looked down at my discharge papers, spread across the hospital bed, instructions for medication, follow-up appointments, warnings about avoiding heavy lifting, guidelines for my new life. But as I sat there in that sterile room, reading Susan's words on the screen of my phone, those papers began to look like something else entirely. Not just medical instructions, they looked like freedom. The papers in his hands weren't just discharge instructions anymore. They were evidence of 45 years of being a fool. I walked out of Memorial Hospital on unsteady legs, each step reminding me that I'd almost died and nobody cared. The taxi driver was a weathered Hispanic man with kind eyes. Tough day at the hospital, amigo? Tough 45 years. The words came out before I could stop them. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror as we pulled into Dallas traffic. Surgery? I nodded, settling back against the vinyl seat. The discharge papers crinkled in my lap, and suddenly I was remembering another time I'd held important papers in shaking hands. 1982. Scott was just a baby, and I was 25 with dreams bigger than our small apartment. I'd saved for 2 years to buy that motorcycle, a beautiful Harley-Davidson that made me feel alive every time I fired up the engine. But babies need cribs, not motorcycles. The bike has to go, Susan had said, bouncing Scott on her hip. We need the money for baby furniture. I'd polished that chrome one last time before putting the for sale sign on it. $3,000 for freedom traded away for responsibility. I told myself it was temporary, just until Scott got older. The taxi passed a motorcycle dealership. Rows of shining bikes sat in the afternoon sun, and my chest ached with more than surgical scars. Family's tough sometimes, the driver said, navigating toward the highway. Mine too. Another memory surfaced. 1995. Susan and I were planning our delayed honeymoon. 15 years late, but finally within reach. Paris in springtime. I'd been saving for months, working overtime at the factory. Then Scott got accepted to college. Europe will always be there, Susan had said, tears streaming down her face as she tore up the travel brochures. Scott's education is more important. 4 years of college expenses. The Paris dreams went into a box with my other postponed happiness. We were passing through downtown now, the glass towers reflecting the gray January sky. I remembered driving this same route in 2003, exhausted from pulling double shifts, while Susan stayed home watching her soap operas. When do I get to rest? I'd asked her once, collapsing into my recliner after 16 hours at the plant. When Scott graduates and gets a good job, she'd promised, then we'll have time for us. Scott graduated. Then he needed help with rent. Then a car loan. Then seed money for his graphic design business that folded within 6 months. The business loan memory hit hardest. 2010. I'd signed papers putting our house as collateral, while Scott sketched grand plans on restaurant napkins. This is our ticket, Dad. 6 months, and I'll pay back everything with interest. The business lasted 4 months. I worked 3 more years to pay off that loan. The taxi turned onto familiar Arlington streets. Past the elementary school where I'd coach Scott's little league team while missing my own dreams. Past the park where I'd push Susan on swings during our courtship, back when she looked at me like I was her hero instead of her ATM. You got people picking you up? The driver asked as we neared my neighborhood. I thought about the text messages still burning in my phone memory. Call a taxi. Stay another month. It's so good without you. No, I said quietly. I think I'm done being picked up. The house appeared around the corner. White siding, green shutters. The lawn I'd mowed every Saturday for 20 years. It should have looked like home. Instead, it looked like a monument to my stupidity. I paid the driver and stood on the sidewalk, looking at 45 years of mortgage payments and maintenance work. All so Susan could have her book club meetings and Scott could have his gaming setup. The driver pulled away, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a house that suddenly felt like evidence of the biggest mistake I'd ever made. I walked toward the front door, keys heavy in my fingers. The house looked different now, not like home, like evidence. The key turned with a soft click, and I stepped into darkness. Even the entryway felt different, foreign, like entering someone else's life. I flipped the light switch and stared at what my family had done with their freedom. Mail was piled on the small table by the door, unopened bills and advertisements scattered carelessly. Susan's shoes lay where she'd kicked them off, beside Scott's muddy sneakers. Nobody had bothered picking up after themselves for weeks. The living room was worse. Scott's gaming setup had exploded across the space like a teenager's bedroom. Energy drink cans formed a pyramid on my coffee table. Pizza boxes stacked beside my recliner. The chair I'd bought with overtime money 15 years ago. They'd been having parties. I moved slowly through the evidence of their comfort. My absence hadn't caused grief or concern. It had caused celebration. The kitchen told the same story. Dishes piled in the sink, takeout containers filling the trash. The refrigerator held expensive wine and premium ice cream, luxuries they'd bought while I was fighting for my life. But my study was the final insult. They'd turned it into storage. Boxes of Susan's craft supplies covered my desk. Scott's old computer equipment was stacked on my bookcases. Dust had settled over the family photos I'd arranged so carefully on my shelves. 47 seconds. I'd been dead for 47 seconds, and they'd used my personal space as a closet. I sat heavily in the one chair they hadn't covered with their belongings. The combination to my safe was still burned into my memory. Scott's birthday. How fitting. The safe opened with a soft mechanical whisper. Inside, my will sat in its blue legal folder, right where I'd left it months ago. I pulled it out with steady hands and read the provisions I'd crafted so carefully. To my beloved wife, Susan Thompson, the house and all personal property. To my son, Scott Thompson, all financial assets, including retirement accounts. To be divided equally upon my death, beloved wife. I laughed bitterly, the sound echoing in my violated study. The woman who told me to stay in the hospital another month because it was so good without me. My son, the 38-year-old man who couldn't pause his television show to pick up his dying father. I walked to the family photos on my dusty shelves. Wedding pictures showed a young couple full of hope. Scott's baby pictures captured innocent smiles and tiny hands reaching for the camera. Vacation photos documented trips I'd paid for but barely enjoyed, always worried about the cost. In every picture, I was smiling. The provider, the protector, the fool. I opened my phone and searched Estate Attorneys Dallas. The screen filled with law firm names and phone numbers. Professional people who understood that wills could be changed, that inheritance was a privilege, not a right. Jonathan Hale and Associates appeared at the top of the list, experienced in estate planning and charitable giving. Perfect. I looked around my study one more time, at the boxes covering my desk, at the dust on my personal belongings, at the evidence of my family's disrespect. Then I looked at the will in my lap. Tomorrow I would call Mr. Hale. Tomorrow I would fix the biggest mistake of my life. Tonight I would plan exactly how to give my family what they deserved. Nothing. The elevator climbed past floor after floor, each number bringing me closer to justice. 15 floors up in this downtown Dallas high-rise, Jonathan Hale waited with the power to rewrite my family's future. A week had passed since my homecoming revelation. 7 days of research, planning, and gathering documents. I'd found the American Heart Disease Foundation online, a charity that helped families during cardiac emergencies, people who actually valued the gift of life. The elevator doors opened to a hallway lined with mahogany and brass. Hale and Associates was etched in gold letters on frosted glass doors. Mr. Thompson? The receptionist's smile was professional and warm. Mr. Hale is ready for you. Jonathan Hale's office overlooked downtown Dallas through floor-to-ceiling windows. Law books lined the walls between framed degrees from universities I'd never dreamed of attending. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 55, with silver hair and intelligent eyes. Please sit down, he gestured to a leather chair across from his massive desk. I understand you want to make significant changes to your estate plan. I settled into the chair, my folder of documents balanced on my knees. I want to leave everything to charity, nothing to my family. His eyebrows rose slightly. That's quite a substantial change. May I ask what prompted this decision? I told him about the surgery, about being dead for 47 seconds, about 2 weeks in the hospital without a single call, about coming home to find they'd been living it up while I fought for my life. Hale listened without interruption, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. Mr. Thompson, I have to ask, are you making this decision while you're angry? Sometimes, after medical crises, people... I've had a week to think about it. I opened my folder and pulled out printed emails, bank statements, medical records. This isn't anger. This is clarity. He reviewed my documents carefully. You're quite thorough. The American Heart Disease Foundation is an excellent choice. They provide housing for families of cardiac patients, fund research, support recovery programs. People who appreciate the value of life, I said, unlike my family. We could structure this as a charitable remainder trust. You'd retain lifetime use of your home, receive a small monthly income, and upon your death, everything transfers to the foundation. Perfect. I could live comfortably while knowing my family would inherit exactly what they'd earned. What about your wife and son? Even a small bequest might... No. The word came out harder than I'd intended. They're adults. Time they learn to support themselves. Hale studied me for a long moment. Very well. This will take about an hour to draft properly. Are you certain about this course of action? I thought about Scott's message. Call a taxi. I'm watching TV. About Susan's words. Stay another month. It's so good without you. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. The next hour passed in a blur of legal language and document preparation. Hale's secretary brought in witnesses. 2 paralegals who didn't know me from any other client, changing his will. This revokes all previous wills and codicils, Hale explained as he laid the documents before me. Upon your death, your home and all assets transfer to the American Heart Disease Foundation. You retain lifetime residence rights and a modest monthly stipend. I read every word twice. No mention of Susan, no provision for Scott. Just clean legal language that would transform my family's comfortable assumptions into a very different reality. The signing ceremony was surprisingly simple. 3 signatures, 2 witnesses, 1 notary stamp. 45 years of supporting an ungrateful family, erased with black ink on white paper. I'll contact the foundation this week, Hale said, handing me certified copies. They'll want to meet with you, discuss the media announcement possibilities. Media announcement. I like the sound of that. Public recognition for charity. Public embarrassment for my family. The foundation offices are in this building, he continued, 12th floor. Their media coordinator, Rebecca Mills, is excellent at handling these kinds of stories. I stood to leave, the certified copies safely tucked in my jacket pocket. At the door, Hale shook my hand with genuine respect. You're giving a generous gift, Mr. Thompson. The foundation helps hundreds of families every year. Families who deserve help, I replied, unlike mine. The hallway seemed brighter as I walked back to the elevator. Behind me, Hale's office held the machinery of justice. Ahead, the foundation offices waited with the power to turn private satisfaction into public vindication. The foundation offices were just 3 floors down. Time to turn private justice into public message. 3 floors down, the foundation offices buzzed with morning activity. Time to turn private justice into public message. The elevator opened to reveal a bright reception area decorated with heart health posters and success stories from grateful families. Mr. Thompson? Rebecca Mills emerged from a corner office, all business efficiency and warm smile. I'm Rebecca Mills, Media Coordinator. Thank you for choosing our foundation. Her office walls displayed awards and framed newspaper clippings about successful fundraising campaigns. This woman understood the power of a good story. Please sit down, she gestured to a comfortable chair across from her desk. Your attorney mentioned you want to make your donation public. Tell me about your situation. I explained everything, the surgery, the 47 seconds, the hospital abandonment, the cruel text messages. Rebecca listened intently, taking notes on a yellow pad. This is powerful, she said when I finished. Your story could save hundreds of lives. People need to understand how vital family support is during medical crises. If my pain helps someone else, then it's worth it. She picked up her phone and dialed. Channel 8? This is Rebecca Mills at the Heart Foundation. I have a story for you. A local man is donating his entire estate after his family abandoned him during heart surgery. The conversation lasted 10 minutes. Rebecca's eyes lit up as she talked. They can have a crew at your house this afternoon. Perfect timing. Heart disease awareness. Week starts Monday. The morning flew by in preparation. Rebecca coached me on key messages, the importance of family support, the Foundation's mission, the reality of cardiac recovery. But most importantly, she wanted me to tell the truth about my family's abandonment. Don't hold back, she advised. People respond to authentic emotion. Your story will touch hearts and save lives. By noon, we were at Channel 8's studio downtown. The news producer, a sharp woman named Jennifer, understood immediately why this story mattered. A man gives away his house after family texts him to stay in the hospital longer? Jennifer shook her head. This is going to resonate with viewers. The studio interview went smoothly. Bright lights, professional cameras, questions I'd practiced with Rebecca. The interviewer, David Martinez, had the perfect blend of sympathy and journalistic precision. Mr. Thompson, what went through your mind when you read those text messages from your family? I realized that love should be mutual, I replied steadily. Gratitude is a choice, not an obligation. For 45 years, I chose to put my family first. When I needed them most, they chose differently. Why donate specifically to heart disease research? They saved my life when my heart stopped for 47 seconds. My family didn't seem to care whether I lived or died. After the studio interview, the crew followed me home to Arlington. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains as the Channel 8 van parked in my driveway. Professional cameras captured the house that would soon belong to the foundation. Inside, David asked more personal questions while the camera rolled. We sat in my living room, the same room where Scott had expanded his gaming setup during my hospitalization. This is where you recovered after coming home from the hospital? This is where I discovered they'd been living comfortably without me, having parties, ordering expensive food, using my study for storage. The camera panned across family photos on the mantel, wedding pictures, Scott's graduation, vacation memories, all funded by my sacrifices, all witnesses to my wasted devotion. Do you have any regrets about this decision? I looked directly into the camera. My only regret is that it took me 68 years to understand my own worth. The crew finished filming by late afternoon. David shook my hand with genuine respect. This will air tonight at 6. I expect it'll get picked up by other stations too. I spent the evening at a quiet restaurant downtown, my phone buzzing occasionally with messages from Rebecca about social media preparation. The Foundation's online team was ready to capitalize on the story's impact. At exactly 6 o'clock, I watched myself on the restaurant's television. The news anchor introduced the story with perfect dramatic timing. A Dallas area man is making headlines tonight after donating his house to charity. But it's the reason behind his generosity that has everyone talking. My face filled the screen, calm, dignified, telling the truth about family betrayal and medical abandonment. The segment included footage of my house, my explanation of the foundation donation, and Rebecca's comments about the importance of supporting cardiac patients. The restaurant was quiet, but I could see other diners glancing at the television than at me. Some looked sympathetic. Others seemed outraged on my behalf. My phone remained silent throughout dinner. Rebecca had advised me to let the story spread naturally before checking social media responses. By tomorrow, she predicted, the story would be everywhere. As I drove home, I wondered if my family had seen the broadcast. They watched the local news religiously, usually complaining about the weather or arguing with the political coverage. Tonight, they'd see their own cruelty broadcast to thousands of strangers. Tonight, they'd realize their comfortable life was ending. The garage door opened to reveal the same house I'd left that morning, but everything had changed. By tomorrow morning, Scott and Susan would understand that their 45 years of taking me for granted had finally caught up with them. I turned off the television and went to bed, sleeping peacefully for the first time since my surgery. The evening news was just background noise in the Thompson living room. Susan flipped through her magazines while Scott divided his attention between his video game and the television. Leftover pizza boxes and empty soda cans showed how comfortably they'd settled into life without Buford. "Another boring day," Scott muttered, mashing buttons on his controller. "Nothing ever happens in this stupid town." Susan looked up from her magazine. "At least we don't have to deal with your father's constant worrying. Remember how he used to fuss about every little expense?" They both laughed, completely unaware that their world was about to explode. The news anchor's voice changed tone. "A Dallas area man is making headlines tonight after donating his house to charity. But it's the reason behind his generosity that has everyone talking." Scott's game controller slipped from his fingers. The house on the television screen looked exactly like theirs. Same white siding, same green shutters, same oak tree in the front yard. "Mom," Scott whispered, "that's our house." Susan's magazine fell to the floor. They stared at the screen in growing horror as the camera panned across their property. This couldn't be happening. This had to be some mistake. Then Buford's face filled the screen. "Oh my God," Susan breathed. "That's your father." They listened in stunned silence as Buford explained his situation to the interviewer. Heart surgery. Clinical death for 47 seconds. Family abandonment at the hospital. "When I asked my family to pick me up from the hospital," Buford said calmly, "my son told me to call a taxi because he was watching television. My wife said I should stay another month because it was so good without me." Scott's face went white. Those were his exact words. Susan covered her mouth with both hands, recognizing her own cruel message broadcast to the entire Dallas area. "This is impossible," Susan screamed at the television. "He can't do this. That's our house." The news segment continued with Buford explaining his decision to donate everything to the Heart Disease Foundation. No mention of family inheritance. No provision for Susan or Scott. "Call him." Susan grabbed Scott's arm, shaking him. "Call him right now." Scott fumbled for his phone, hands trembling as he dialed his father's number. The call went straight to voicemail. "Dad, it's Scott. We just saw the news. What are you doing? Call us back immediately." Susan snatched the phone and tried herself. Again, voicemail. "Buford Thompson, this is your wife. You call me back this instant. This is insane." They called repeatedly for the next hour. After the 10th attempt, Buford's phone stopped ringing entirely, going directly to voicemail every time. Meanwhile, the story was exploding on social media. Scott's Facebook feed filled with shares of the news segment. Friends and neighbors were commenting, recognizing their house, expressing outrage at the family's behavior. "Look at this," Scott showed his mother the screen. "Everyone's calling us monsters. They're saying we deserve this." Susan was crying now, mascara streaming down her cheeks. "Where will we go? We have no money. Everything is in his name." The reality was sinking in. The house, the bank accounts, the retirement funds, everything belonged to Buford. They'd lived so comfortably for so long that they'd forgotten they owned nothing. By 10 o'clock, they'd left 67 voicemails and sent dozens of increasingly desperate text messages. Buford wasn't responding to any of them. "He's lost his mind," Scott said, pacing frantically around the living room. "The surgery damaged his brain. He doesn't know what he's doing." "Or maybe he knows exactly what he's doing," Susan whispered, staring at the phone in her hands. "Maybe this is revenge." They spent the rest of the evening trying to process the magnitude of their situation. No income, no savings, no property. Scott had never held a real job, and Susan hadn't worked in 30 years. "What do we do?" Scott asked his mother around midnight. "How do we fix this?" Susan wiped her eyes and looked around the living room, at Scott's expensive gaming equipment, at her designer magazines, at the comfortable life they'd built on Buford's sacrifices. "We wait for him to come home," she said grimly, "and we make him understand that family is family, no matter what." They positioned themselves in the living room where they could see the driveway. Susan made coffee to stay awake. Scott charged his phone to keep calling. Neither of them slept that night. They sat by the window, watching for headlights, preparing arguments that might save their comfortable life. But deep down, they both knew something had fundamentally changed. The man they'd taken for granted for 45 years had finally stopped taking it. They'd been waiting since dawn, rehearsing words that might save their comfortable life. Susan sat by the front window, coffee cup trembling in her hands. Scott paced behind her, phone clutched like a weapon he didn't know how to use. The sound of Buford's key in the lock made them both freeze. This was it, their chance to fix the disaster they'd created. Buford stepped through the door at 8:30, unhurried and calm. He found them blocking his path to the kitchen, their faces desperate and determined. "Dad!" Scott stepped forward aggressively. "What is this madness? We're your family." Buford removed his jacket slowly, hanging it on the hook by the door. "Family?" His voice was conversational, almost pleasant. "When I was in the hospital fighting for my life, did either of you call even once?" "We were busy." Susan's voice cracked with false indignation. "You know how hard it is to manage everything without you." "So hard that you told me to stay another month in the hospital?" Buford's tone remained steady, but his eyes were ice cold. "Because it was so good without me?" Scott's prepared arguments crumbled under his father's calm stare. "That was a joke. We didn't mean it seriously." 67 phone calls last night," Buford observed, walking past them toward the kitchen. "Funny how you can find time to call when your inheritance is threatened." They followed him like desperate satellites, talking over each other in their panic. "Dad, please listen to reason." "Buford, you're not thinking clearly. The surgery affected your judgment. We love you. We've always loved you." Buford filled the coffee maker with methodical precision, ignoring their increasingly frantic pleas. When Susan grabbed his arm, he looked down at her hand with such cold detachment that she immediately let go. "You have 24 hours to leave this house," he said quietly. The words hit them like physical blows. Susan staggered backward. Scott's face went white. "Where will we go?" Susan's voice was barely a whisper. "We have no money." "That's no longer my problem." Buford's complete emotional detachment was more terrifying than any anger would have been. This wasn't the man who'd spent 45 years putting their needs first. This was someone entirely different. "You can't do this!" Scott's voice rose to a shout. "I'm your son. This is my home." "Your home?" Buford turned to face him directly. "When did you last pay a mortgage payment? A utility bill? When did you contribute anything besides dirty dishes and demands for money?" Scott opened his mouth, but no words came. The truth was too obvious to deny. Susan tried a different approach, forcing tears. "Honey, I know we made mistakes, but 45 years of marriage has to count for something." "It did count," Buford replied, pouring his coffee. "It counted for everything, until you showed me exactly how little I meant to you." "We can change." Susan's desperation was palpable now. "We'll be different. We'll appreciate you." "For how long? Until the next time you need something? Until I'm too old and sick to be useful?" Buford shook his head. "I'm 68 years old. I don't have time to wait for you to become decent people." He walked to the kitchen table and sat down with his coffee, opening the morning newspaper as if they weren't there screaming at him. "The foundation will take possession next month," he said without looking up. "You have until then to find somewhere else to live." Scott slammed his hand on the table. "This is our house, too." "Check the deed," Buford replied calmly. "Check the bank accounts. Check any legal document you can find. Everything is in my name because I earned it while you lived off my labor." The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating the scene of their total powerlessness. For 45 years, they'd assumed Buford would always be there, always providing, always forgiving. They'd been wrong. Susan collapsed into a chair, finally understanding the magnitude of their situation. Scott stood frozen, watching his inheritance disappear with his father's every word. "When I come back from my walk," Buford said, standing and reaching for his coat, "I expect to see packing boxes." He checked his watch, 9 o'clock exactly, and walked toward the door. Dad, wait, Scott started. 23 hours and 58 minutes, Buford said without turning around. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Susan and Scott alone with the wreckage of their comfortable assumptions. Outside, Buford walked down the street he'd called home for 20 years, feeling lighter with every step. Behind him, through the kitchen window, he could see them still sitting in stunned silence. Justice had a surprisingly peaceful feeling. The packing boxes were already stacked by the door when I returned from my walk. They'd taken me seriously. Through the front window, I could see Susan frantically wrapping dishes in newspaper, while Scott carried his gaming equipment to his car in multiple trips. I settled into the rocking chair on the front porch with my morning coffee, positioning myself with a clear view of their desperate activity. The morning was crisp and clear, perfect weather for new beginnings. "Dad, this is your last chance," Scott called out as he struggled with a heavy computer monitor. "We can fix everything." "You had 45 years for chances," I replied, not looking up from my newspaper. Susan appeared in the doorway, her hair disheveled, and her eyes red from crying. "Buford, honey, I'm sorry about that message. I wasn't thinking clearly." "That's exactly the problem, Susan. You never think about anyone but yourself." The packing process was chaos. 45 years of accumulated possessions, and they had less than 24 hours to sort through it all. Susan kept running back inside for one more important thing, while Scott debated whether his old computer games were worth the trunk space. Mrs. Henderson from next door came over around noon, drawn by the unusual activity. "Everything all right, Buford?" she asked, noting the boxes and frantic movement. "Just some family changes," I said pleasantly. "Nothing to worry about." She nodded politely, but her curious glances suggested she'd seen the news coverage. The whole neighborhood probably knew what was happening by now. Scott made increasingly desperate appeals throughout the afternoon. First anger, "This is completely insane. You can't survive without us." Then bargaining, "What if we paid rent? What if we contributed to household expenses?" Finally pleading, "Dad, where are we supposed to go? Mom's never worked a real job in 30 years. "I've lived 68 years, I replied calmly. "I think I'll manage just fine." Susan tried every manipulation tactic in her considerable arsenal. Tears, health concerns, appeals to our marriage vows, reminders of happy memories. None of it moved me. I'd seen this performance too many times over the decades. By 4 o'clock, both cars were packed beyond capacity. Clothes and belongings stuffed into every available space. They'd had to leave behind furniture, kitchen appliances, and boxes of items that simply wouldn't fit. "We'll be back," Scott said as he loaded the last box into his trunk. "You can't keep us away forever." "You're welcome to visit," I said, "after you call first and ask permission." Susan stood by her car, keys in hand, staring at the house she'd called home for 20 years. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "I never thought it would end like this," she whispered. "Neither did I admitted. "I thought you'd learn to appreciate what you had." At exactly 6 o'clock, 24 hours after my ultimatum, both cars pulled out of the driveway. Susan was crying. Scott was angry. But they were gone. I sat on the porch until dark, watching the sun set over my quiet neighborhood. For the first time in 45 years, I was completely alone. The silence was beautiful. Inside, the house felt enormous. Empty rooms echoed with my footsteps. No television blaring, no arguments about money, no demands for attention or support. I walked to my study and opened the desk drawer where I'd hidden travel brochures for 20 years. Colorado mountains, Arizona deserts, national parks I'd always wanted to visit but never had time to see. Time. I had nothing but time now. The travel brochures had been hidden in my desk for 20 years. Now, finally, I could open them without guilt. February passed quietly as I adjusted to solitude, planning my first real adventure since before my marriage. March brought my inaugural trip to Big Bend National Park in Texas. I'd never camped alone before, never driven anywhere just for pleasure. The desert landscape overwhelmed me with its harsh beauty. Endless sky, ancient rock formations, silence that stretched for miles. Around a campfire one evening, I met Tom, a retired teacher from Oklahoma. "First time out here?" he asked, noting my brand new camping gear. "First time anywhere, really," I admitted. I'm 68, and this is my first trip just for pleasure. Tom laughed warmly. Hell, son, it's never too late to start living for yourself. April took me to Colorado. I'd upgraded my camping equipment and felt more confident tackling mountain roads. The thin air challenged my recovering heart, but gentle hikes through pine forests filled me with energy I hadn't felt in years. I discovered photography that month, buying my first real camera in decades. The mountains demanded to be captured, snow-capped peaks reflected in crystal lakes, wildflowers blooming in high meadows, sunrise painting granite cliffs gold. May brought new friendship. Sarah, a widow from Denver, taught me advanced photography techniques at a seniors hiking group. We'd spend hours discussing composition and lighting while walking forest trails at elevation my cardiologist would have forbidden 6 months earlier. You're glowing, Dr. Carter observed during my regular checkup. Your recovery is remarkable. What's changed? Everything, I told her. I'm finally living for myself. My foundation work intensified throughout the spring. Rebecca featured my travel photos in their newsletters, showing other heart patients that life after surgery could be an adventure, not just survival. Your story has already saved dozens of families, Rebecca told me over coffee in June. They've learned to value each other while they still can. But my favorite part was talking to new heart patients, men and women facing surgery, terrified and alone. I'd share my experience, not just the medical details, but the emotional journey of discovering self-worth. Family support matters, I'd tell them, but self-respect matters more. Summer brought longer trips. Arizona's desert bloomed with unexpected colors. Utah's red rocks challenged my photography skills. New Mexico's ancient ruins connected me to history, stretching back centuries. I was healthier at 68 than I'd been at 58. Regular hiking, fresh air, stress-free living, and purpose-driven days had transformed my body as much as my spirit. Tom and Sarah became regular traveling companions. We'd meet at different parks, share campsites, explore trails together. For the first time in my adult life, I had friends based on shared interests rather than family obligation. You're like a different person, Sarah observed one evening as we watched sunset from our campsite in Zion. What were you like before? Tired, I said simply. Very, very tired. Social media, managed by Rebecca's team, showcased my adventures. Photos of an older man discovering joy in nature, stories of family healing through honest communication, inspiration for other seniors to pursue delayed dreams. Comments poured in from around the world, heart patients sharing their own family struggles, adult children recognizing themselves in Scott's behavior, spouses understanding Susan's patterns of taking devotion for granted. July ended with my returning to Arlington, not because I had to, but because I chose to. The house felt welcoming now, my sanctuary rather than my prison. I was reviewing photos from Colorado in my favorite coffee shop downtown when a shadow fell across my table. I looked up to see a familiar figure standing uncertainly nearby. Scott stood there, hesitant, looking different somehow, cleaner, more adult. Scott stood there, hesitant, looking different somehow, cleaner, more adult. His usual gaming attire had been replaced by business casual clothes, and his posture suggested someone who'd learned to carry responsibility. Dad? His voice was uncertain. Could I sit down for a minute? I gestured to the empty chair across from me, curious about this transformation. 6 months had passed since the eviction, and my son looked like he'd aged 5 years, in a good way. You look well, he said, settling into the chair, tanned, healthy. Travel agrees with me. I closed my photo album but didn't put it away. How are things, Scott? Different, he paused, choosing his words carefully. I found a job, full-time position at an advertising agency downtown, designing marketing materials. I nodded, waiting for more. I rented a small apartment too, nothing fancy, but it's mine. I pay the rent myself, buy my own groceries, do my own laundry. That's good, son. Scott pulled out his phone and showed me photos. A modest studio apartment, clean and organized. Sparse furniture, but everything neat and purposeful. How's your mother handling things? I asked. She's learning to live independently. Got a job as a sales clerk at Macy's. Has her own place, too. He looked down at his hands. We don't see each other much. Both too busy working. I sipped my coffee, studying this transformed version of my son. The entitlement was gone, replaced by something resembling humility. "Dad, I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said suddenly. "I'm not asking to move back home, or for money, or for you to change your will back." This surprised me. "What are you asking for?" "A chance to prove I've changed. Maybe we could have coffee sometimes, like this, if you want to." I showed him a few photos from my Colorado trip. His amazement seemed genuine as I described hiking at altitude, camping under stars, learning photography from new friends. "I never knew you wanted to do any of this," he said softly. "I never had the chance to find out myself." Scott nodded, understanding more than I'd expected. "I've been thinking a lot about that, about how much of your life you gave up for us, how we just took it for granted." "The foundation work keeps me busy too," I said, showing him a newsletter featuring my story, helping other families avoid our mistakes. "Are we a cautionary tale now?" "We're a learning opportunity, for everyone involved." We talked for another hour. Scott shared details about his job, deadlines, difficult clients, the satisfaction of earning his own paycheck. He showed genuine interest in my travels, asking about places I'd been and where I planned to go next. "I understand if you don't want a relationship," he said as we prepared to leave. "I understand if trust needs to be rebuilt slowly. But I wanted you to know that I get it now. What we did to you. How wrong it was." I walked with him to the parking lot. He had an older sedan, nothing fancy but clean and well maintained. Evidence of responsibility. "Scott," I said as he reached for his car door, "maybe we could do this again. In a month or so." His smile was cautious but hopeful. "I'd like that." "No promises about anything else," I clarified. "I'm not changing my will back. I'm not looking for a traditional father-son relationship. But maybe we can build something new, something healthier." "I understand," he said. "And Dad, I'm glad you're happy. Finally." I watched him drive away, noting how carefully he checked his mirrors, how he signaled properly at every turn. Small things, but they suggested someone who'd learned to pay attention to details. The afternoon sun was warm on my shoulders as I walked to my own car. Tomorrow I was planning a trip to Arkansas, exploring the Ozark Mountains. Next month, maybe Maine for fall foliage photography. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom. "Sarah found a great campsite in Utah for October. You interested?" I typed back, "Absolutely. Send me the details." 6 months ago, I'd been a dying man ignored by his family. Today I was alive, healthy, and surrounded by people who chose to be in my life, rather than people who felt obligated. The difference, I'd learned, was everything. I drove home through Arlington's familiar streets, past the coffee shop where Scott and I had just shared an honest conversation, past Mrs. Henderson's house where she waved from her garden, past the Hart Foundation office where Rebecca was planning next month's awareness campaign. Home to a house that was finally, truly mine. Home to a life I'd built for myself, one careful choice at a time. Some stories end with grand gestures and dramatic reconciliations. This one ended with something more valuable, the quiet satisfaction of a man who'd learned to value himself as much as he'd once valued others, and maybe, just maybe, the possibility that love could grow in healthier soil than obligation. The sun was setting as I pulled into my driveway, painting the sky the same colors I'd photographed in Colorado. Beautiful, peaceful, and entirely my own. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.